Chapter 5. The blue lockers stand along the tall white walls of the west hallway of Nordham High School. Jeremy stands at his locker, staring at the number 163 posted at eye level. Noticing the massive indentations down the length of his and the surrounding lockers, he reaches over for the small steel handle at the level of his waist. A throbbing begins in his hands as he remembers the day he put such damage on these 3 lockers. When he heard of his father's death and cried ferociously as he pounded his fists over and over again into the cheap metal containers. Eyes watching him from every direction as he very publicly broke down in the middle of school after receiving the horrible news. Remembering how he was so jittery that he couldn't open his locker and completely lost himself until he was escorted out of the building and was given a ride home by a neighbor. Taking in a long, deep breath, he closes his eyes for a moment before entering his combination. Left spin, right spin, left spin, and after pulling on the handle, he stands quietly, door wide open, and shuffles through books and papers on the top shelf. Searching his locker for the supplies he will need for the next couple of hours of class that he doesn't already have in his book bag, he keeps himself from falling to the power of that memory. There is shuffling all around him as students pass and he hears his name mentioned a few times in loud whispers as they do. Closing his eyes, he begins to block out the noise, trying to find tranquility in an uneasy place. Suddenly, a fist pounds into the locker directly across from his, creating a growing echo throughout the hall over the normal bustling of the students. "Damn it!" Jeremy hears a shout come from the same direction as the pound. "I forgot about the test today!" A familiar voice yells from behind him into the surface of the locker across from his. Jeremy turns around to see the back of the head of an old friend, AJ, who is slamming that head over and over again into his locker. AJ turns around, leans his shoulders into the locker, and ferociously slams the back of his skull into the metal door. Looking up, he catches a glimpse of Jeremy across the hall, and a smile spreads quickly across his face. "Oh, hell yeah!" he yells out as he begins to jog across the hall toward Jeremy, dodging bystanders on the way and nearly running over a small freshman girl with glasses. As he continues onward, he begins smiling flirtatiously at her as she goes forward on her way. AJ has black hair and brown eyes. He stands just a few inches short of Jeremy's height, but makes up for it with the gelled up spikes sticking up all over his head. A giant smile graces his untrimmed, peach fuzz covered face as he hastily comes up on Jeremy's position. Stopping just short of running into Jeremy, he quickly does a rhythmic spin and ends up with his back against the locker next to Jeremy's with an arrogant air of cool to him. Looking Jeremy up and down, he throws his hand out, palm up, in a curious manner and asks him how he's doing. Hair covers Jeremy's frowning face as he lowers his head and he turns and returns to shuffling through his locker. "Well, man, it's good to have you back in school. I haven't really talked to you since the funeral. Never mind that." AJ shakes his head regretfully, trying to think of a better subject to move on to. "You weren't in Samson's class first period, so I didn't know you were in school today." His face scrunches up for a second. "Why the hell didn't I know you were coming back to school today?" He gives Jeremy's shoulder a gentle, playful shove. AJ smiles, but Jeremy doesn't really react. Realizing his friend isn't really in a playful mood, AJ takes a small step back. "Oh, have you kept up with your schoolwork?" He goes on, finding a subject that is a little less painful. I dropped it all by your house, but I was always your mom who answered the door." Jeremy hears him and nods slightly a few times. "Yeah, I got it all," he answers back. "Thanks." He tilts his head slightly upward toward AJ. but his head still lowered and voice almost too low to hear. He faces back to his locker and grabs the largest book by far from the top shelf. It's an algebra text with terrible binding, a scratched cover, and bent corners. He shoves it into his backpack with little regard for its or anything else in his backpack's safety. Reaching back up, he closes his locker door and he spins the combination lock quickly before turning to head off towards his first class. Later, he says as he begins to walk away. AJ sighs and quickly reaches out to grab Jeremy by the shoulder before he's able to make it very far. Jeremy stops walking and turns hesitantly around to face him. "I'm sorry, man." AJ apologizes. "This is the first time I've talked to you in almost a month, and the first thing I bring up is school." He shakes his head. "I'm an ass, dude." He continues his apology to the friend standing before him. "Look, Calvin is having a bonfire tonight," he smiles. "There'll be music, some booze, and quite a few ladies." He swings around to Jeremy's front side and places both hands on his shoulders. Lowering his head to meet Jeremy's eyes, he continues on. "Why don't you come with me? We'll have a great time." He smiles, removes his hands from Jeremy's shoulders, and gestures a little dance to signify a good time. "Nah, that's okay," Jeremy answers back, shaking his head. "I'm not really in the mood for something like that. Maybe some other time," he says with a small shrug. Okay, forget the girls," AJ says, shaking his head. "I don't think Aaron would appreciate that too much anyway." He continues with a small laugh. Jeremy just shakes his head again in response. "Alright," AJ sighs. "But look," he continues on, "soon we're going to get together and do something, alright?" He asks as he starts to back away and head toward his next class. "Okay," Jeremy answers back with a half smile and a nod. He then turns off in the opposing direction and heads for his class as well. Shuffling through the crowd for a minute or two, he stands before his second period classroom just as the bell screams out, echoing down the hall. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the story and how it's going, please subscribe so you can get every chapter as it comes through. Discuss in the comments, plot threads, and where you think the story's going. Share with anybody you think might find it interesting. Until then, I'll see you next video.